Maybe we're in a simulation right now.
Yeah.
So when maybe you or somebody else creates an AGI system and you get to ask her one question, what would that question be?
What's outside the simulation? "40 years ago, we had Pong, like two rectangles and a dot. That was what games were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have virtual reality, we'll have augmented reality. If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality. Just indistinguishable. Even if that rate of advancement drops by 1,000 from what it is right now, then you just say, okay, well, let's imagine it's 10,000 years in the future, which is nothing in the evolutionary scale. So given that we're clearly on a trajectory to have games that are indistinguishable from reality, and those games could be played on any set-top box or on a PC or whatever, and there would probably be, billions of such, computers or set-top boxes, it would seem to follow that the odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions.
The universe is 13.8 billion years old. Civilization, if you're very generous, civilization is maybe 7,000 or 8,000 years old, if you count it from nothing.
There may be ways to test whether it's a simulation. There might be. I'm not saying there aren't. But you could certainly imagine that a simulation could correct that. Once an entity in the simulation found a way to detect the simulation, it could either restart, pause the simulation, start a new simulation, or do one of many other things that then corrects for that error. There are likely to be millions, maybe billions of such simulations. So then, what are the odds that we're actually in base reality? Obviously, this feels real, but it seems unlikely to be real.
If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then games will be indistinguishable from reality, or civilization will end. One of those two things will occur. Therefore, we are most likely in a simulation.
Today, with a $100 device, you can video conference with anyone in the world, on the other side of the world. And if you have a Wi-Fi connection, it's basically free. Free to have an instant visual communication with anyone, or even with millions of people. With social media, you can communicate to millions of people simultaneously. And you can Google something and ask any question. It's like an oracle of wisdom that you can ask almost any question and get an instant response. It would have been incredibly difficult to predict these things in the past, even the relatively recent past. So I think the one thing that we can be quite certain of is that any predictions we make today for what the future will be like in 50 years will be wrong. If civilization stops advancing, then that may be due to some calamitous event that erases civilization. So maybe we should be hopeful that this is a simulation, because, otherwise, either we're going to create simulations that are indistinguishable from reality, or civilization will cease to exist. Those are the two options.
I think most likely, this is just about probability, there are many, many simulations. These simulations you might as well call them reality, or you could call them multiverse. Well, when we create a simulation, like a game or a movie, it's the distillation of what's interesting about life. It takes a year to shoot an action movie, and then that's all distilled down into 2 or 3 hours. So, let me tell you, if you see an action movie being filmed, it's boring. Super boring. There's like lots of takes, everything's in a green screen. Looks pretty goofy. Doesn't look cool. But once you add the CGI and have great editing, it's amazing. So, I think most likely, if we're a simulation, it's really boring outside the simulation. Because why would you make a simulation that's boring? You make a simulation way more interesting than base reality.
It's
Why do you
radically
think you're
different.
where you are right now? You might not be. Right now, you think you're in a studio in LA.
That's what I heard.
You might be in a computer. You know, there's that old sort of thought experiment of like, how do you know you're not a brain in a vat? You know, right now, here's the thing. You are a brain in a vat. Then that vat is your skull.
Yes.
And everything you see, feel, hear, everything, all your senses are electrical signals. Everything is an electrical signal to a brain in a vat, where the vat is your skull. If this is not real, what is? It feels like consciousness is in a different dimension, but this could be just an illusion. You know, if you damage your brain in some way physically, you damage your consciousness, which implies that consciousness is a physical phenomenon, in my view. The thing is that I think are really quite likely is that digital intelligence will be able to outthink us in every way, and it will simply be able to simulate what we consider consciousness, so to a degree that you would not be able to tell the difference.
From what I've heard of Oculus Rift and some of the other sort of immersive technologies, that it's quite transformative. You really feel like you're there. And then when you come out of it, it feels like reality isn't real. I think we'll see probably less physical movement in the future as a result of the virtual reality stuff. If you extrapolate into the future and say, well, how good, let's say, will video games be in 100 or 200 or 1,000 years from now? If there's continued improvement, and you're in a full body haptic suit with a sort of surround vision, they'll be so realistic you will not be able to tell the difference between that game and the reality as we know it. And then it seems like, well, how do we know that that didn't happen in the past and that we're not in one of those games ourselves? One of the most troubling questions is artificial intelligence. And I don't mean narrow AI, like vehicle autonomy I would put in the narrow AI class. It's narrowly trying to achieve a certain function. But deep artificial intelligence, or what is sometimes called artificial general intelligence, where you could have AI that is much smarter than the smartest human on Earth. This, I think, is a dangerous situation.